The functional fitness showdown between the Pioneer and Leberstock finally happened, and I think you're going to enjoy this just as much as I did. Adam is a very bright-minded individual, and in this clip that I'm going to share, he was talking about more robust movement pattern. If you like the conversation, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and you can watch the full conversation on our Kettle Nights podcast. Link is in the description. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the other channel as well, to the podcast channel, because let me tell you, the greatest learning experiences that I was able to draw from happened on our podcast. But before we get started, we help busy over 40s get in shape with only 30 minutes of kettlebell training per week in the next 6 weeks. If you want to find out more about our method, check the first link in the description and download our free ebook called The Kettlebell Code. So now, without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation.
Nikolai Bernstein, neurophysiologist, describes it as creating more robust movement patterns. So like instead of there being just one area, one direct line where you're really strong, you've got like a little bit of wiggle room because you're used to moving in slightly more dynamic ways. And in the book, The Brain That Changes Itself, there's a really good analogy, which is like when you're rehearsing a movement, it's like going down a ski slope. And if you take the exact same route every time, then you create this really deep groove in the slope, which means you're amazing at going down following that groove. But you're not going to be able to go anywhere else because that's all still thick snow. But whereas if you take a slightly different path every time, you're creating a wide, flat surface. Like he wasn't talking about it in fitness, but it applies so well. And now you can make a slight mistake without being at serious injury because you've got those more robust movement patterns. And then that's exactly what you're doing with something like kettlebells. One of the things that's so cool about it is that it is slightly different every time. You are at those awkward angles, but if you're learning using a lighter weight to begin with, you're building up, the motor patterns, you're building up the tendons, the fascia, the supporting muscles, so that you can deal with the slightly unexpected. Like when my kid runs at me and leaps into me when I'm squatting on the floor and I'm not expecting it, like she has no regard for my health or safety. And but I can usually cope with it because
how come?
Like I have to tell. Yeah, she was just like, I'll just jab my elbow into his leg. Like, why? I'll just see what happens.
Let's just be a kid. Like, let's see what happens. Let's get a reaction out, Daddy.
Yeah,
that's
right.
What's up. Man,
like literally
awesome.
Leap off the stairs onto my neck, like when I'm not expecting it. But that's where it's useful to have made a few mistakes and have trained a bit differently, because you are stronger in different positions.
Wow.
It's just like knees over toes, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's something I really find interesting.
That's
and it's something I'm trying to incorporate more and more, because for me, one of the ultimate ways to do this is actually with certain types of sport, like swimming, like trail running in particular, boxing, and kettlebells, all movements that have more variety in them. You don't get the hypertrophy to the same extent because you don't have the specificity, you don't have the intensity, but you're creating that wide base. And I think if you can combine the two, if you can combine the more varied movement with the more intense stimulus for hypertrophy, you've got like a really good grounding for all sorts of performance. And that's where combining more stuff I think is interesting.
Most definitely. That's why I always say that the kettlebell is one of the best. Lots of people like it's one of the best tools, and I always say I would slightly alter the statement by saying it's one of the best generalists tool. It touches many bases of physical qualities all at once, and it gives you this, like you're describing, this wide base. And you also describe this in your video, this in-between movements. It's actually a great description because the ballistic element has this unforeseenness to it. It's the unknown. It's the unpredictability. Even if you're very used to swinging, snatching, and cleaning, especially the ballistics, it always forces your body into certain angles, especially if you use heavier weights and if you're very advanced. When I use the 28 and the 32, it brings me into different angles, even as I'm getting tired a little bit, and I let it pull me a little bit more. And it's this, what I believe, it's my hypothesis that the kettlebell does rebuild the elastic component of the body, which we lose as we age. And I had a weightlifting scientist on a podcast who described it like this. He said, do you know why cheetahs are the fastest animals? And I said, no. He said, because they coil their spine. It's not the strength. It's the ability, the elastic ability of the spine that gives them this exploding, fast, twitch-like movements that have nothing to do with strength, because it's not the strongest animal, not at all,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so rebuilding this elastic component is one thing that, especially in the hips, most of us are tight in the hips because we sit on it all day. And I believe that's why so
Yeah.
many, we get so often these comments that back pain has either improved or even eliminated. They just feel better, that the running gets better. All this transfer effect into many different areas, which Pavel coined the "what the hell" effect. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's just a specific adaptation that you never engage in if you don't swing weights for particular longer sets of time, especially bells in that regard,
Yeah.
or kettlebells. Of course, you get a different stimulus and a different adaptation. And this is why the kettlebell shines the most. It's the ballistic element attached to it, which lots
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
people do not really engage in when they, like you said, when they only engage into hypertrophy. Yes, you don't get this maximum stimulus, but as we all know, is if you specialize into something, into one area, especially on a physical perspective,
Yeah.
you're weak in other areas. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you're Ronnie Coleman, the most muscular. All right,
Yeah.
awesome, right? But I mean, let's put his injuries to the side. Let's just say if you're the most muscular man on earth, I guarantee you probably your mobility is not that great. Your heart has probably built up some tissue that I don't know if you. It's an awesome book by Dr. Kenneth Shea. It's called The Cardio Code, and in
Yeah. No.
that book, he describes that you don't want to get the powerlifter's heart,
Yeah.
because he says when you train in that fashion where you always have to pull heavy and then you contract and then you hold the flow of air because you breathe in, right, the Valsalva maneuver and anything, what this creates is it thickens the wall of the heart muscle, which so the heart muscle has hypertrophy going on, but that's
Yeah.
actually not the good kind of hypertrophy. What you want is
Yeah.
increased capacity of the insides, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's so fascinating, and that's why, especially as we grow a little bit older, we understand we should or it makes sense to take a little bit more of a wide base approach, which we now
Yeah.
call functional training, or I like to call it practical training, where you use
Yeah.
everything at your disposal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I think the kettlebell like plugs gaps that really aren't that well covered by an awful lot of other stuff. Like in terms of the ballistic, I think another comment on my video was that the kettlebell swing is a ballistic deadlift, and that's why it translates so well to everything. That made such sense because like the deadlift itself translates to so much, but you do it in that grindy fashion. Whereas if you're doing it in an explosive fashion, and also just that number of reps is just so good for like ingraining that movement pattern. Like when I bend over, I'm gonna hip hinge, like which I needed. I now do. I try and most days do some kettlebell swings, even if it's only like 15, just to say like, come awake, glutes. Like I'm not going to have you, because I know what happens when you disappear. But yeah, so and yeah, that's exactly it. That's being a specialist is awesome if you want to be the top of your game. And I think that's the problem. Like most people don't. That's one of my mission statements is to try and like suggest to people like you don't have to be the best at one thing. Like that actually doesn't make sense for most people. Like people will critique
Yes.
like the kettlebell or whatever else, saying, "Oh, but you're not going to build maximum strength like that." I'm like, "But why do you want maximum strength? Once you got to the point where, like, if you can bench press 150 kilograms and all you're focused on is going up to 155, I can't see like it is cool, like definitely, like kudos, but I can't see if you're interested in just health and fitness. There's no tangible benefit, and it takes so much effort to add that 5 kilograms when maybe like your cardio could use some work, and they'll be like, yeah, but I won't be as strong. And it's like, but that's okay. Like you don't need to be. But that's how everybody seems to think. And they like, I don't know. It seems to me you get into fitness, and for a lot of people, they just get funneled down this powerlifting route or this bodybuilding route.
Yeah,
And then once they
most
get to a certain
100%,
yeah, and when they
100%.
get to the certain standard, then all they do is like, I'm going to get better and better and better and better at this one thing, because I guess it's like sunk cost and all that. They want to, and maybe they enjoy it, which is great. But if your original goal was to be healthier and fitter, then that doesn't make sense, because you're training like a specific athlete at the expense of all your other qualities. Like, my kettlebell swinging is nowhere near as good as like you or Mark Wildman or any of the other top guys. My handstands are like nowhere near as good as fitness FAQs or the bodyweight warrior. Like my martial arts is terrible. Everyone tells me how bad my boxing is, but like my goal is to bring a combination of those things,
Yeah,
and then
that's
like
the
at
key.
least I can like hang with people, like it's cool, like, and I'm okay with not being the best, because like you got to look at the bigger picture, and then that's where people will critique functional training. And functional training can kind of mean what you want it to mean, which is, this is my version of functional training. People say, what's the point of functional training? Every movement has a function. All
Yes,
movements are
yeah,
functional
yeah,
training.
yeah,
Therefore functional training is nonsense.
yep.
But I say, I'm not telling you that's my point. All movements have a purpose. It's the program. Like, what are you missing out? Because you can be doing all these functional exercises. Yeah, a powerlifter, yeah, you're getting stronger. It's all functional. But if you can't go for a long jog, or if you can't touch your toes, to me, that's not functional. So it's not about what you're doing being wrong. It's about what you're not doing that maybe you could benefit from. And you don't have to go all in, but just like, for a lot of people, just adding a little bit of mobility or adding a little bit of cardio could do them such wonders. And they're so afraid to like lose 5 kilograms on their squat or whatever. But it's like, no offense, you're probably not going to be a world champion squatter. Like, this serves you no benefit. You can't put that much weight on your back in the real world. There's no scenario where you would ever use that. And yeah, it translates to running speed and jumping height, but so do a ton of other things.
Oh, one,
So yeah, to me, just variety is the spice of life. Not to,
mo-
and that's the thing as
most
well.
definitely.
Like, anything where you go too far, I think you're eventually going to start to see yourself degrade in certain ways. Like, repetitive strain injury, I don't think is necessarily about usually that you've done something too much. It's that you've done something too much without doing the opposite movement, or without doing the surrounding movement. So you've created imbalances. Like, it's not the exercise that's bad for you, it's taking it too far that's bad for you often.
Or even, as we all know, pain and injury is that's I I always get a little bit frustrated when clients walk in and then they had a session with the physiotherapist and they're like, well, the reason is X, Y, and Z. The
Yeah.
physiotherapist is X, Y, and Z. And trying to be as respectful as possible, I always say pain and injuries is multifactorial. It's
Yeah.
your like you said, your genetics, your stress
Yeah.
level, how well did you sleep, how active are you, how's your capacity, how's your regeneration, how's your family life, how's your sex life. It's everything
Yeah.
boils down to it, where you cannot even pinpoint it sometimes. It's like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and right, yep, go ahead.
Mechanically as well, it can be like one issue here, and this issue here is causing that issue there, that's causing that. You're compensating all across your body. And yes, it's a pet peeve of mine when you see YouTube videos where they're like, this will cure your back pain. It's like, no, it almost certainly won't. Like, I'm not saying they're not good tips. It's not good, but there's not one, like, and also I do think they're valuable often, but if it talks someone out of seeing a professional, because you could have, if you've got back pain, you could have a tumor. I've been trying to communicate this lately. Like, you can't just start doing this one exercise because you saw it on YouTube and it's definitely going to fix it. It might be unfixable. And not to be negative,
But
but
it's the
you need to
truth.
get it
It's the truth. Yeah.
you need to get it seen by someone. Like, maybe do that exercise too, or tell that professional, but don't be like, this one exercise, oh, it's just this. Oh, you have that problem because you did this. Like, you don't know,
But
like you say,
you know what's
anything about this person.
you know what's funny about this? It's the clickbait, right? Or I call it legit bait, because I do this too. I think everybody does this.
Oh, me too.
And
Yeah,
why?
you have to.
And here's the key: why are we doing this? Because people want that. That's the crazy thing. They want this one exercise to be the cure to cancer, right? So they want
exactly.
that. And so there is such a huge demand for simple solutions to complex problems that if you don't do it, as a YouTuber, for example, then you're left out of the equation. So what I do is then I come up with some crazy titles. For example, in your case, I said, what did I say? The binary messed up.
I thought I was in so
It made a
much trouble.
huge mistake. All right?
I was watching it like this.
And every time I gotta do this because it's so funny. Even in this video, I'm probably call it the functional fitness showdown or something like this, right? Where people are like, oh, what's going on? These guys are battling each other. No, we're just having a conversation. But people want that to a certain extent. So that's one thing. But you're mentioning very interesting points about the biomechanical reality, which is most definitely true. But at the end of the day, I always want to, stick to my knowledge base and tell people, listen, do you think it's the swing that hurt my back? Then sometimes I say, well, it may be not ever doing swings was the reason why you hurt your back, and now a couple of swings are now exaggerating or
Yeah,
exacerbating the problem, right? But at the end of the day, it's so multifactorial that I cannot tell you that this is the reason. Let's just explore. Let's experiment with
yeah,
different exercises, and like you said, if that thing persists, you might as well go have to check it out. Stop that YouTube thing for a moment. Go to a medical professional, to a real, a person who studied this stuff, not just a YouTube video,
yeah. And who can
and then
see you
see
in person?
exactly, and then they can help you, right? So lots of
Yeah,
things
yeah,
can help you, but sometimes, two things can be true at once. Yes, this exercise can help you, but it's also you might have a bigger issue at the end of the day, right? So that's the crux of it all, and that's what I love about it. That's why I
yeah,
love
yeah,
fitness, because
yeah.
it's so many factors come into play, and you never stop learning if you are an
It's
avid
like
listener, right?
a murder mystery or something. Like
Yeah,
it's
exactly. Good point.
frustrating sometimes when you fix one thing and realize something else is wrong. But like you learn so much about yourself